Oscar Wilde said that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. How about when you imitate your own work? Gladiator 2 obviously has a lot to live up to. The first Gladiator in 2000, portraying the General Maximus in his fight against the unhinged Emperor Commodus, is a beloved movie by many, and won 5 Oscars, including for Best Picture.
And the Oscar goes to Gladiator.
It's also one of my favorite movies ever. It captured the timeless struggle of an individual against tyranny, the triumph of a free spirit against the shackles placed upon it, and the sheer perseverance of will born out of love and loyalty. Does Gladiator 2 manage to capture the same feeling? Well, yeah, because the overall story beats are pretty much the same as the first one. Surprisingly so. It's like the Force Awakens of the sword-and-sandal genre, if Ridley Scott intended to remake his famous epic. Just with some slight differences in detail and more bombastic battles, he definitely succeeded. Does that mean it's just as good or even better than the first? Well,
The odds are against you.
The odds are always against me.
right off the bat, the historical inaccuracies are rampant, and they don't let up. It's fair to say I have a lot invested in the history of this period, from my education to my hobbies, but this film treats history like a rented mule. So it's best to view this as a period spectacle rather than any kind of faithful exploration of the time, or you'll go crazy. The first movie had its fair share of inaccuracies as well, but they're much more prominent here. Everything is a bit looser in that department. This film also doesn't reach the heights of the first, in terms of drama and characters. Lucius is no Maximus, Geta and Caracalla as emperors are no Commodus, and Macrinus as a wild and wily manipulator is also no Commodus. So what are we left with? Well, we have a revenge/redemption story set in ancient Rome, with a lot of the same overarching plot points that Gladiator had. It was an attempt to make the spectacle grander. But in doing so, the storyline feels more muddled. The characters feel a little flatter, the motivations are a bit washed out, and the epic feel is somewhat diminished. Certain plot elements felt forced, the flow was unnatural at times, and the events felt a bit artificial. Like Ridley Scott or the writer David Scarpa, who wrote the screenplay for Napoleon, was trying too hard to push everything along. Some story beats are entirely predictable too, which isn't helped out by how closely this movie tries to stick with the formula from the first one, or how much it tries to be a sequel. I was surprised at how much was devoted to tying the first and second movie together, and I couldn't help feeling that it would have been much more interesting if this one had decided to do its own thing completely, just with Maximus as a kind of mythical, ideological kind of figure that our hero aspired to be like. But Ridley Scott goes all in on the sequel angle, and we see a couple returning characters. Lucilla, played by Connie Nielsen, is back. She was decent and felt very much like she belonged in this movie and the time period. Her character has progressed to where you might expect her to be in the aftermath of the last movie. She ends up being quite an important character in the film, and a motivating factor for our protagonist. Senator Gracchus also shows up, looking a bit older than before. He doesn't have a large role to play and is mostly relegated to the background. As far as Hanno goes, or if you've seen the trailer, Lucius, Paul Mescal does a decent job. I think he's a good actor and portrays Lucius well. He can bring some emotional range to the character, and he's believable in combat situations. But his acting never feels as consistent as Russell Crowe's. There are times he's joking around and he feels like a guy just hanging out with his buddies or something, and then there are times when he's serious or angry or leading men into battle, which feels very different. But Maximus always felt like Maximus, even during moments of levity. He always felt like the same character and always carried a certain amount of gravitas in every situation. Lucius isn't quite that. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Personally, I think it makes the character feel less convincing. But he's well-rounded and engaging, although he doesn't look anything like young Lucius from the first movie, but oh well. Pedro Pascal as the reluctant General Marcus Acacius does a fine job. His character surprised me, and the story went a completely different way with him than I thought it would. I actually would have liked to have seen him play a larger role, but what he brings to the movie works well. The Emperors Geta and Caracalla are a strange duo, quirky and impulsive, but they never feel truly threatening.
The gods have spoken!
Not like Commodus. If you've never checked out the Rome docuseries on Netflix but are interested in this kind of stuff, watch the episode about Caligula. The actor does a fine job of portraying a mad emperor who still feels threatening and in control. These two just feel a little dumb and easily manipulated. I think Ridley Scott should have gone for more of a Caligula type feel. The guy who supposedly promoted his horse to consul, but still feels like he could kill you if the mood strikes. Something similar to that happens in this movie, just without that sense of danger, which gives it a totally different feeling. Denzel Washington's Macrinus, based on a short lived emperor who usurped the throne for a year, is a new unknown element, and mixes up the Gladiator formula the most. I had my doubts about his inclusion in this movie when I saw the trailer. His character was at the same time fascinatingly and frustratingly the most enigmatic. I was never really clear on what his real motivation was, chaos or control. As the movie goes on, Macrinus takes on an almost cartoony quality. He goes from being subtle and mysterious to over the top and kind of ridiculous, but he is entertaining. A bit more time was spent outside the arena compared to the first film, dealing with senators, the emperors, and Macrinus. Some of the relationships felt odd and unnatural, like they were going for some kind of friendly rivalry, but it didn't quite hit as intended. Senator Gracchus never feels as relevant as he did in the first one, and neither do the other senators as well. Aside from the characters and story, a Gladiator movie wouldn't be complete without some epic battles and glorious shots of ancient warriors and locales. The naval siege was exciting and epic, if a bit overblown. The arena battles were grander than those in the first movie, in a way, but also felt more artificial, probably because of a greater reliance on CGI. But despite their grand scale, they weren't that memorable in general. There was nothing really that stuck out like the savagery of the chariot battle in the first movie, or an outstanding foe like Tigress of Gaul, the champion who was brought out of retirement to fight Maximus. There were no real rivals in the arena in that sense. What we get is CGI baboons, a CGI rhino, and CGI sharks, with naval battles and large scale fights. Grander, but not better. When Lucius is fighting an over exaggerated CGI baboon, it feels like someone fighting a CGI baboon. That's to say, pretty fake and unconvincing. A gladiator riding a rhino around is a pretty wild idea, but it's pretty silly and lacks the personal savagery of close combat between men fighting for their lives. That being said, if you like sword and sandal movies and historical combat, it's fun and exciting here, and probably worth a watch just for that alone. I don't know if it's because I've seen so many movies, series, and documentaries about Rome at this point, but the story of a man standing up to the empire feels kind of played out. I think because the first one just did it better. Despite that, Gladiator 2 was entertaining most of the time, if it didn't really hit the emotional highs and lows of the first. But something that was sorely missed was Hans Zimmer's musical score. The music is decent, but when the original songs come on, it's clear just how iconic and outstanding they are compared with the new stuff. That score really helped the original, and it's evident just how much when you see the sequel. Overall, I thought Gladiator 2 was good, not great. It definitely sticks too close to the first movie's formula, which overshadows this one's efforts. But the characters are mostly engaging, and you get invested in what's going on. The action is exciting, if a bit too bombastic and unrealistic, and Denzel Washington and his character do bring something different to the table, which is welcome, if a bit silly at times. If you like the first movie, you may or may not like this one depending on your perspective. If you want to see what happened to young Lucius after Gladiator 1, then yeah, this does a decent job of it. If the first movie is precious to you and you feel it never needed a sequel and see any movie that tries as a pale imitation, then this one may not be for you. I'd give it a 7 out of 10. It's a solid effort, though not one of Ridley Scott's best. It's tempting to take a dump on this movie because it probably didn't need to exist, and the first one does everything better. But this beats a lot of movies that released this year, and it's certainly better than Napoleon. In the grand scheme of sword and sandal movies, I think this ranks in the top third, certainly above Pompeii, Hercules, Alexander, 300, Rise of an Empire, The New Clash and Wrath of the Titans, and so on. But below movies like Conan the Barbarian, of course, 300, and probably Troy, because I have a soft spot for that one. And I think Ridley Scott's own Kingdom of Heaven and The Last Duel are both better than this one. Well, that's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching, and let me know what you think in the comments below.
Are you not entertained?